Hi you guys, and welcome back to my channel. So for today's case, we're just going to dive right on into it. This case was actually brought to my attention by one of my best friends and by one of you guys. So I started researching it and was definitely haunted by this case. The second I read about it and watched the documentary, one of my best friends was like, hey, have you heard about this? And I had never heard of it before, and so she sent me over a link and I watched a documentary on it. And to me, this case there's a lot of stuff swirling around it that just does not seem right to me. So I definitely wanted to cover this case and hopefully raise awareness on this case because, again, I had never ever heard of it, so I imagine that a lot of people might not have heard of it, so that is why I wanted to talk about it today on this channel. If you haven't already, please follow me on social media. Everything is linked down below for you guys in the description box. I'm going to start to ask more questions about what kind of content you guys want to see. For example, for the next video in our Based On series, which is the last video we are doing, which is a series that is focusing on cases that were turned into movies, I'm going to ask you what movie or case you'd like me to cover. So I'm just going to start asking more questions like that, so make sure to follow down below. I'm also going to be leaving a lot of contact information regarding this case down below, as well as the website that her family maintains. So without further delay, today we're going to be talking about the disappearance of Madison Scott. Madison Scott went missing and vanished without a trace on May 28, 2011 while she was on a camping trip at Hogsback Lake, which was located just outside of Vanderhoof, British Columbia. Madison, who went by the nickname Maddie, was described as being extremely independent and full of life. She was a strong young woman who was smart and witty. She loved photography and absolutely loved the outdoors. She was an incredibly active person that was always on the move and loved dirt biking, swimming, horseback riding, and camping. Maddie is an extremely creative person, and she would make videos all the time, whether it was for her visual arts class or if she was just making them on her own. Every single person that was asked to describe Maddie only had the most amazing things to say about her. They always described her as being fun and spontaneous, and they always said that if you were hanging out with Maddie, you were always going to have a good time because she was so adventurous and spontaneous and just full of life. Maddie was also extremely family-oriented, and she was very close with her siblings Ben and Georgia and her parents Dawn and Eldon. And after graduating high school, Maddie actually started working with her father in the logging industry. Again, Maddie was just a bright person. She had a bright future ahead of her. She was excited and ready to experience everything that life had to offer her. However, everything changed when Maddie went to a party and never came back. On the weekends of May 27th, Maddie was actually supposed to hang out with a friend that was visiting in town. However, at the very last minute, she decided to attend a friend's birthday party that was being held at Hogsback Lake, which was an area that Maddie was familiar with. This party was actually publicly posted on Facebook with the time and location, which is definitely important in this case and is something that I'm going to be coming back to. Maddie and her best friend Jordy both decided to attend the party together. They knew that alcohol was going to be present at this party, and they knew that drinking was going to be involved. Before Maddie even went to Hogsback, she did stop at a liquor store and was seen on security footage, so they knew that alcohol was going to be involved at this party, and they wanted to not have to worry about that whatsoever, so they decided to camp out overnight so that they didn't have to drink and drive. Even though Maddie and Jordy were very close friends, this would be the first time that they ever camped out together. Both girls took off for the party and arrived at Hogsback Lake. According to Jordy, once they arrived at Hogsback and began to set up the tent, they realized that the tent was too small and that the tent poles were actually missing. So they basically had to pack everything up again, and they headed back to town. Around 9:30 p.m., Dawn, Maddie's mother, said that Maddie had dropped by the house. She seemed completely fine and just said that she had forgotten her tent poles, that she was there to pick them up, and that she was going to be back on her way again. According to Dawn, everything appeared to be fine. Maddie was her normal self. She was excited about the weekend. She was excited about the party. She was excited about going to Hogsback. And after that, Maddie just left. That was the last time that Dawn would ever speak to her daughter. Now that they had their tent poles and all of their gear and everything was good to go, the girls headed back to Hogsback Lake and began to set up camp. According to Jordy, after they got back to Hogsback, they set everything up and the girls began to go and collect firewood. According to Jordy, everybody began to drink, and as the hours passed, more and more people started to show up to the party. In total, there was about 50 people at this party, and for the most part, everybody everybody was having a really good time. However, later on in the evening, Jordy said that a group of people showed up at the party and essentially crashed it. She said that they didn't know who the people were and that the people were older. From what I've read, these people were like in their 40s or something like that, but she made a big point to say that they weren't invited to the party and that nobody really knew who they were, and she described them as being very rowdy. So what happened next is a little bit interesting because it's mainly Jordy's account of what happened that night, and pieces of information that she gives contradicts other pieces of information that she gives, so I just wanted to make a note of that. In an interview, Jordy said that as the night went on, she became more and more intoxicated and that she actually fell into the fire and decided that that was why she wanted to leave. Then she said in the exact same interview that she approached Maddie at around 1 a.m. and at this time Maddie was already in her tent getting ready for bed, and she told Maddie that she couldn't stay because she was just too drunk. In another interview with 48 Hours, Jordy said that a fight actually broke out and that fight caused her to be pushed into the fire. So those three things are definitely different, so I'm not really sure why Jordy actually left. At first she said it was because she fell into the fire. Then she said by her own account that she told Maddie that she was just too drunk and needed to leave, and then she said that a fight broke out and she was pushed into the fire and that her boyfriend insisted that she leave. I don't know if Jordy just worded it differently in all of the interviews or all of her answers and she just didn't put them into a cohesive answer. It's possible that she was trying to say, hey, I fell into the fire because I'm too drunk and that's why I need to leave, or she could have said, hey, a fight broke out, they pushed me into the fire, I'm too drunk, I need to leave. It's just weird how she gave different answers, and by her own admission she told Maddie that she was just too drunk to stay there. She said that that was the reason that she gave Maddie. She didn't mention being pushed into a fire at all, so it's just very confusing. Either way, it's a little bit strange because she said that she told Maddie specifically that she could not stay because she was too drunk, which is very interesting because the whole reason why they decided to camp out in the first place was because they were going to be drinking and they knew that they were going to be drunk and they didn't want to drink and drive. I don't believe that Jordy's fall into the fire caused any major injuries. She didn't go seek medical treatment or anything like that, so I'm not really sure. Yeah, I mean, that'd be frightening if you fell into a fire, but again, I do not think that she had very serious injuries to where she needed to go seek medical treatment, because I don't believe that she did. At least from everything that I researched, she didn't. Jordy went on to say that when she left the party, there were about 5 people still left there, and that when she went to go tell Maddie that she was leaving, that Maddie begged her not to. However, Jordy just said, look, I'm too drunk and I can't stay here. She offered to take Maddie home. She offered to give Maddie a ride, but Maddie said no. She said that she'd already set up camp and that she didn't feel comfortable leaving her tent and her belongings unattended. Jordy said that she then left Hogsback and that Maddie appeared to be fine. Again, she said that Maddie was in bed, she was getting ready to go to sleep, and she said that nothing seemed out of the ordinary at all. By the time the party officially came to an end around 4 a.m., all of the friends that were supposed to have camped out with Maddie had left and Maddie was all alone. So a couple of hours later, the time that is mentioned by different sources is different. I've seen the time being 10 a.m. and I've heard the time being 8:30 a.m. So I'm going to go with 8:30 a.m. because that is the time that is on Maddie's official website that her parents and her family run for her. So a few hours later, around 8:30 a.m., a few people who had attended the party the night before, including Jordy, returned to Hogsback Lake to check on Maddie and to clean up. When they arrived, they saw that Maddie's belongings were in the exact same spot as they were the night before. Her tent was still up in the same exact spot and her pickup truck was parked in the same exact spot. However, there was no sign of Maddie anywhere. Jordy said that she went over to Maddie's tent and saw that the tent door was wide open. When she looked inside the tent, she saw that Maddie's belongings were all spread out all over the place. She said that they were messed up and kind of pushed to either side of the tent, and she also noticed that Maddie's jewelry, including a pair of earrings and her rings, were outside of the tent on the ground. According to Jordy, Maddie never took off these rings. For whatever reason, after discovering this and there being no trace of Maddie anywhere, Jordy decided to not call Maddie's parents, continued to clean up, left Hogsback Lake, and went to a shift at her work later on that day. Meanwhile, Maddie's parents, Dawn and Eldon, grew a little bit concerned because they hadn't heard from Maddie and Maddie did not come back home. They tried calling her multiple times but did not get an answer. However, Maddie was 20 years old, so they did decide to give her some space. Again, Maddie was a very active, social person, so they assumed that maybe Maddie had decided to stay longer at the lake or had some other plans that she had made. They knew that the reception at Hogsback Lake wasn't the best, and they thought that maybe it was just because Maddie couldn't call them, or maybe Maddie wasn't getting their phone calls. They had no reason to believe that anything bad had happened. In their mind, the weather was nice, it was the weekend, and Maddie was safe with her friends. By Sunday the 30th, Dawn and Eldon still hadn't heard from Maddie, and Dawn started to get even more worried because she hadn't heard from or seen Maddie since Friday night when she left for Hogsback. She called Jordy's mother to try and see if she could find anything out, and that was when Jordy's mother told her that Jordy had arrived back home on Saturday. Dawn then called Jordy, who confirmed that she had returned from Hogsback the day before. At this point, Dawn and Eldon know that something is extremely off. They knew that both girls had gone to Hogsback together, and they now know that Jordy was back and totally fine. But where was Maddie? Dawn and Eldon immediately headed out to Hogsback Lake, and when they arrived, they, like everybody else, saw that Maddie's belongings were in the same exact place as she had left them when she first arrived at Hogsback. Her pickup truck was parked in the exact same spot, and her tent was in the same place. However, it was now collapsed. When they went into Maddie's truck, they noticed that all of her valuables and belongings were there, including her purse and her backpack, and the only things that were missing were her keys and her cell phone. To them, nothing seemed off about Maddie's truck. Again, her valuables and belongings were in there. It didn't appear as if it had been ransacked. It didn't look like anybody had gone through it. The only thing that was obviously wrong was that Maddie was nowhere to be found. Eldon noticed that there were some other campers nearby, and when he approached them, he found out that they were some of Maddie's friends, which was a huge relief initially because maybe they could give him some insight. Maybe they could tell him where Maddie had gone. However, when he asked them if they had seen Maddie, they said that they did not. They said that there was no trace of Maddie, that they didn't see her walking around since they had gotten there, but that they did see her tent and truck there the entire time. After doing a brief search of some of the nearby trails and finding absolutely no trace of Maddie, Dawn and Eldon immediately called 911. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police arrived almost immediately after Dawn called 911, and initially they didn't think that foul play was necessarily involved. They encouraged Dawn and Eldon to call all of Maddie's friends to see if Maddie was with them. Maybe she had decided to not camp out that night and caught a ride with a friend of hers, and maybe she'd just been with them this whole time. So Dawn and Eldon started to call everybody that they knew. They started to go through all of Maddie's friends. They tried to find out who was at the party. They started calling absolutely everybody that they could. However, nobody had seen or heard from Maddie at all. Maddie had literally vanished. When all of Maddie's friends and loved ones had found out that Maddie had gone missing, they were all extremely shocked because, like I said before, Maddie was an extremely independent person. She was a strong-willed person. She was an athletic person. So initially, they thought that maybe Maddie had just decided to leave for a bit. Maybe she did catch a ride with somebody and decided to just get away from everything for a few days. They just couldn't picture Maddie being taken or Maddie going missing. However, as the days started to pass, they all began to realize that something was horribly wrong and that Maddie was actually missing. The RCMP started to question everyone at the party that Maddie had attended to see if they could put together a timeline of what had happened that night and to see if they could find any information regarding Maddie's disappearance. They focused heavily on Jordy in the initial days, and they gave her 2 polygraph tests, which, according to her in one of her interviews, she passed. After they followed up with other people who attended the party, they completely hit a dead end. The police didn't uncover any reason for why somebody would want to harm Maddie, and they didn't have a person that really stuck out to them as a person of interest or as a suspect, so it didn't really lead them anywhere. Authorities supposedly gave everybody that was at the party a polygraph test, and according to Maddie's brother, everyone passed. And an investigator on the case did confirm that polygraphs were being used extensively in this case and were being used as an investigative tool and was being used to help eliminate suspects or persons of interest. The RCMP and other agencies began to conduct searches, and they searched the entire Hogsback Lake area by air, land, and water. They brought dogs in, and hundreds of local volunteers showed up and grid searched the entire area. There were multiple searches in the exact same area. So even if they had searched an area, volunteers would go back in and grid search it again. However, there was no trace of Maddie anywhere. The Scotts hired private residents to use their planes to go out and search for Maddie. They were searching all throughout the day, but they would search in the mornings when it was the coldest with infrared cameras to see if there were any hot spots, but there was still no sign of Maddie anywhere. In total, according to Detlef Schilling, who participated in the search, they covered 60 square kilometers. One thing to keep in mind is the rugged terrain around Hogsback Lake. There isn't a lot of open land and the bush is extremely dense. Some of these searches that these volunteers were doing were not easy and required a lot of energy, and it just shows you how much the community wanted to find Maddie. They refused to give up and continued to search every area that they possibly could. And you have to keep in mind that some of this land that they were going on hadn't been touched or seen in years. And it's evident when you look at the photos of Hogsback Lake. It's a beautiful area, but to me it had a very haunting, almost eerie vibe. It just looks very isolated. There are so many abandoned structures and houses and vehicles. It's almost as if people just packed up or people just like disappeared and just left everything behind. So many areas around Hogsback Lake were just abandoned. On top of all of that, there were several back roads in and out of the area as well as unmarked roads. Some of these roads were accessible and some of these were not. Some people that were local to the area were actually helping search parties and were telling them where to search. You know, if they knew that there was an abandoned house or something like that, they would say, oh hey, there's an abandoned house, you might want to go search there, and the search parties would go. So the locals were definitely trying to help out as much as they could in terms of helping the search parties navigate the area. Many members of the community were spending their weekends searching for Maddie. Many of them would take their boats out and go search for her. They would search in other lakes, not even Hogsback Lake, but just lakes that were around the area. They would take off vacation time to search for Maddie. Again, this just did not happen, and the community was rallying so hard behind the Scotts. They really wanted to find Maddie. In the initial days after Maddie went missing, authorities discovered that another party was held at Hogsback Lake the night after the party that Maddie had attended. So Maddie had attended a party on Friday, and another party took place in the exact same location at Hogsback on Saturday evening, and supposedly at this party there were around 150 people there. According to some people that were at this party, Maddie's truck and tent were still there, but there was no trace of Maddie. The police searched the nearby trails and the tracks on them and determined that Maddie most likely left in a vehicle and don't believe that she wandered off. They've asked the public many times to come forward if they have any information on Madison Scott's disappearance. Shortly after Maddie's disappearance, authorities heard that a local 28-year-old named Fribian Bjornsson, who was also a friend of Maddie's, was going around town saying that he knew what had happened to Maddie. According to Jordy, Maddie's best friend, Bjornsson was bad news and she didn't know why Maddie was hanging out with him. Bjornsson was known to have been involved with drugs and a shady crowd. At the time, a rumor began to swirl around that Maddie had been kidnapped in order to teach Bjornsson a lesson because he owed some people money. However, when authorities brought Bjornsson in, he said he did not know what happened to Maddie. He was supposedly extremely cooperative. He spoke with them, he answered their questions, he took a polygraph test and passed, and he was eventually cleared by the police. However, something strange happened. Just 2 days after Bjornsson was brought in and was talking to police, he went missing. And just 2 weeks after that, the police made a horrific discovery. Bjornsson's severed head was found in an abandoned house in a nearby town. Even though people say that Bjornsson was hanging out with a shady crowd and was involved in drugs, his parents insist that he was getting his life together at the time of his death, and they said that they believed he was killed for a paycheck that he had cashed on the night that he went missing. Eventually, 4 people were charged in Bjornsson's death, and there was really no major movement in Maddie's case. The police were unable to link the 2 cases together. To this day, the rest of Bjornsson's remains have never been found. Maddie's missing persons flyers are pretty much plastered all over the town of Vanderhoof and pretty much all over British Columbia. Again, the community has really come together. They want to make sure that this case is solved. Obviously, they want to bring Maddie home. However, even with the community coming together and the extensive searches, there has been no sign of Maddie since she attended the party at Hogsback Lake. There have been no major developments in Maddie's case, and the police have never publicly named a suspect or person of interest. Over the years, many people have begun to wonder if Maddie's disappearance was connected to a section of Highway 16, which has been dubbed the Highway of Tears. The section of Highway 16 that is known as the Highway of Tears is in between Prince George and Prince Rupert, British Columbia. The city of Vanderhoof, where Maddie lived, is right along this infamous and dangerous highway. Since 1969, at least 18 women have gone missing or been murdered on the Highway of Tears. Most of them were teenagers and of Aboriginal descent. Even though some of the cases have been solved or have had an official suspect named, the majority of them are still unsolved to this day. There's no doubt that this highway is known for high criminal activity. There are literally signs on this freeway that tell you not to hitchhike because of how dangerous it is. It's believed that a serial killer or multiple serial killers are active on this highway, and they believe that it is a hunting ground and a dumping ground. The town of Vanderhoof knew all about the Highway of Tears and had recently experienced another awful tragedy. Just 6 months before Maddie went missing, teenager Lauren Leslie was murdered. She is among the listed Highway of Tears victims. Luckily, her killer was brought to justice and was not only charged for Lauren's murder, but was also charged for the murders of 3 other women. Some people began to wonder if her killer was also responsible for Maddie's disappearance. However, her killer was already in custody when Maddie went missing. However, could there be a connection between Maddie and the Highway of Tears? Hogsback Lake is approximately 71 miles away from Highway 16. Like I mentioned before at the beginning of this video, the party that Maddie had attended at Hogsback was posted publicly on Facebook with a time and location. Is it possible that a predator came across this event and decided to head out in that direction that night? Again, is it possible that Maddie's disappearance is connected to the Highway of Tears in some way? When it comes to theories in this case, there are a few, and I'll talk about the ones that I saw most often. I will say that I think the biggest piece of evidence, in my own opinion, is the rings that were found outside of Maddie's tent. So as I go through theories, I'm kind of keeping that in the back of my mind. The first theory is that Maddie died accidentally at Hogsback Lake after everybody had already left, and that her body just simply has not been found yet. Many people speculate that Maddie could have wandered off to go to the bathroom, which could have led to her becoming more disoriented. People speculate that she could have fallen and injured herself, maybe hit her head and succumbed to her injuries, or have even suggested that Maddie could have accidentally fallen into the lake and drowned. If we look at this theory, it's definitely possible. Even though there were extensive searches done in the area, there has been plenty of times where remains have been found in areas that have already been thoroughly searched. Sometimes it really is just a weird thing that happens. Since Hogsback does have an extremely rough terrain and very dense bush, it is possible that Maddie just has not been found yet. However, if that's the case, we would have to assume that Maddie had wandered off a pretty far distance because, again, they did multiple grid searches around the campsite. And when I look at the campsite, yeah, sure, there's bushes and stuff like that, but I don't see them missing Maddie's body if it were there. I think that if she wandered off, she would have had to have gone off quite some distance because they grid searched it multiple times around the campsite, and there was no evidence of Maddie, of her keys, of her cell phone. There was no clothing that she had been wearing the night before. There was literally no trace of her anywhere around that campsite. I'm not sure if Maddie would have been able to wander off that far unless she had a flashlight with her or something like that, which she could have, or she could have used her phone maybe. I use my phone, the flashlight on it, quite a bit. If I need to find something in my purse or something like that, maybe she used that to wander off for whatever reason. But I don't see her doing that. We don't know for sure how intoxicated Maddie was that night because she's not around to tell us. We do know that Jordy was completely intoxicated, but we don't really know what Maddie's state of mind was. And from what I've read, Maddie was definitely not blacked out drunk. She wasn't completely inebriated. So to me, she's an experienced camper. She knows Hogsback well. And if she's not completely drunk, I just don't see her wandering off that far from her tent. She knows how to camp. She knows that it's not safe to walk, a very far distance. So I just don't see that necessarily happening. But if you do take into account that she had been drinking, I don't think that a drunk, tired person would make the effort to walk an extremely long way to use the bathroom. I would think that if you're tired and you're drunk, or if you've been drinking and just want to pass out, that you would probably just go you know, a short distance to use the restroom. I don't think you would go on a very long trek to go to the bathroom. I don't know, maybe that's just me. To me, the same applies if Maddie was going to be sick. A lot of people have speculated that maybe Maddie woke up and was very sick and decided that she needed to obviously get out of her tent and go some distance to get sick. But if that's the case, I feel like there would be evidence of her getting sick, and I feel like you wouldn't wander off very far in order to be sick. I just don't see you going off on a trail to do that. You know what I'm saying? I don't see it happening. Of course, it's possible, but there really is no evidence of Maddie getting sick anywhere near the campsite. And again, I don't see her walking very far in order to get sick. Some speculate that Maddie could have been attacked by a wild animal. However, there's no evidence that really supports that. If Maddie did get attacked by an animal, there would definitely be evidence of that in the tent. There would be rips on the tent, I would assume. If she was outside of the tent and was, you know, maybe using the restroom and was attacked by an animal, there would still definitely be evidence of that as well, and there wasn't any. The RCMP has definitely stated that they believe foul play is involved, and they believe that Maddie left the area by vehicle. Since they have made those two statements, it makes me believe and wonder if they were able to pull Maddie's cell phone records and were able to look at pings. To me, if they were able to look at pings, it might tell them where Maddie could have gone, and if she was traveling a great distance in a short amount of time, it would point to her leaving in a vehicle. So I believe that the authorities have evidence that supports Maddie leaving the area that they have not released to the public yet, and I would assume that it has to do with her cell phone and pings. The second theory is that something happened at the party and that the people that were at the party know what happened to Maddie. To me, this is definitely possible too. So the RCMP has flat out said that they do not believe that any of the 50 people that were at the party that night are responsible for Maddie's disappearance. They've also made a lot of references to polygraph tests, so I'm just going to put two and two together and assume that they are using the results of those polygraph tests to rule people out as being a suspect or a person of interest. However, as we all know, polygraph tests are not the most reliable thing. They're used as investigative tools, but they are not foolproof. They don't always come out with the correct answers. It's easy to lie and pass a polygraph test. It's also easy to fail one when you're telling the truth, and it comes down to sometimes the most minor of things. Sometimes it comes down to the way that a polygrapher asks the question. Sometimes it comes down to the questions themselves. Sometimes it's how the polygrapher interprets the results. So if the RCMP is only ruling out people based on polygraph test results, I'm really skeptical of that. However, let's just say that the RCMP gave polygraph tests to everybody and everybody passed, or they were somehow cleared or whatever. How would the police know that they questioned every single person that attended the party that night? It's well known that people crashed the party towards the end of the night. Jordy has said multiple times in interviews that she did not know who the people were, so how would the police know who they were? How would police be able to track down every single person from that party when some of those people weren't even supposed to be there, and when those people weren't even known by the people who were throwing the party? If you look at the actions of Jordy and the other friends that returned to Hogsback Lake the next morning, you almost have to throw your hands up in the air and be like, why? Because it really just doesn't make any sense. Maddie was left all alone in the middle of nowhere at a campsite, was most likely intoxicated to some level, maybe not completely hammered, but she had still been consuming alcohol and was left all alone at a campsite. You come back the next morning and find her tent still up, but the belongings all scattered and messed up inside. You notice that her rings that she never takes off are on the ground outside of the tent, and you see no trace of Maddie anywhere. Maddie is nowhere to be found. Then you look at her truck, and you would assume that Maddie most likely did not leave of her own accord. Remember, Jordy said that Maddie wanted to stay because she didn't want to leave her tent unattended. She didn't feel comfortable leaving her belongings there, and that was the whole reason why she wanted to stay. So if Maddie wasn't comfortable leaving her tent, why would she leave her tent and her truck? Why on earth would you not call her parents to let them know? To me, that makes absolutely zero sense. I'm not saying that Jordy was involved. I'm not saying that Jordy hurt Maddie, but her actions are questionable. And if you look at this case, it's almost impossible to not ask yourself why Jordy did what she did. If I left my friend at a campsite for whatever reason, and I came back and discovered my friend's belongings the way that Maddie's belongings were discovered and didn't see any sign of my friend being there, I would definitely call their parents. Sure, admitting that you left your friend all alone at a campsite is not a good look, but to just see all of that and not call her parents, continue to clean up at the campsite, and then just continue on with your day like nothing happened, that just doesn't seem right to me. In one of her interviews, Jordy mentioned that a fight broke out and that she was pushed into the fire. Did something else happen? What was the fight even over? Jordy also mentioned that she left at 1 a.m. and that around 5 people were still at the party. Could one of those people have made a pass at Maddie? Could Maddie have rejected it? Did something happen accidentally or did something happen intentionally? And most importantly, are other people covering it up if something did happen? When you look at some of Jordy's interviews, a lot of people believe that she appears to be apathetic and rehearsed. I can't really speak to that because, again, we all kind of deal with trauma differently. Some people are very emotional, some people try to keep their emotions inside, some people block off the event entirely, some people are in shock, some people, are still reliving trauma, so I can't really speak to that. I can say that I would not smile if I was talking about acing polygraph tests when it came to my friend disappearing, but everyone is different. Supposedly the last people that left the party left around 4 a.m. Someone from the group, which I am assuming may have been Jordy, returned around 8:30 a.m. to check on her and she was nowhere to be found. What happened between 4 a.m. and 8:30 a.m.? What if someone that did leave the party and knew Maddie was alone came back? Again, she was supposed to be camping out with Jordy and Jordy left around 1. For whatever reason, other people continued to leave a couple of hours after that, and it was evident that Maddie planned on staying. Did someone come back on their own to try and take advantage of Maddie? Or is it possible that Maddie realized that nobody was staying and asked for a ride at the last minute? Maybe she decided, nobody's staying here, I guess I just have to kind of leave my stuff behind, I'll come get it in the morning. If that's the case, did someone from the party give her a ride? If that person gave her a ride, did something happen? The third theory is that Maddie's disappearance has something to do with the death of Fribbjørn Bjornsson. To me, it's very interesting that just 2 days after Bjornsson spoke with police about Maddie's disappearance, he went missing, and just 2 weeks after that, he was found dead. If we do look at this theory, it points to maybe Maddie's disappearance and Bjornsson's death being a complete coincidence, or maybe it's not. It was said that people were angry with Bjornsson over money and that Maddie was taken as a warning. If that's the case, it would certainly explain why Maddie was never found out at Hogsback. From what I know, Maddie and Bjornsson had some sort of relationship. I don't know if they were close friendships or if they had dated. I believe they had maybe dated briefly or something like that, but they weren't in a serious relationship from everything that I researched. I could be wrong on that, but from what I gathered, there wasn't a serious relationship happening between the two. So if people were trying to get back at Bjornsson because he owed them money, why, out of all the people in Bjornsson's life, would Maddie be the target? The only reason why police's attention even went onto Bjornsson was because he was supposedly going around town saying that he had information about Maddie's disappearance, or he said that he knew what had happened to Maddie. However, when he was brought in to the police station, he said that he had no idea. He said he did not know what had happened to Maddie. He said he wanted to clear his name. He was extremely cooperative. He sat down for interviews. He took a polygraph test and passed. So if all of that checks out, it makes me believe that Bjornsson did not really know what had happened to Maddie, and that if he was somehow involved, it wasn't him directly doing anything to her or really even knowing what had happened, and more points to people in his life maybe doing something because they were angry at him. I'm not trying to speak badly about Bjornsson. Again, his parents have maintained that Bjornsson was getting his life together. Authorities have said that he wanted to clear his name, that they believed him, and they said that his death was due to maybe a gang issue or a money issue or something to that effect. I didn't do a ton of research into Bjornsson's case, but I do believe that it was around some gang activity and that there was some sort of money issue involved. Was Bjornsson actually going around town telling people that he knew what had happened to Maddie, or was it just a rumor? Was this rumor actually in fact started by people who actually did know something about Maddie's disappearance and wanted to put the attention elsewhere? The fourth theory is that Maddie met with foul play at Hogsback and was abducted by someone that she did not know. This person could or could not be connected to the Highway of Tears. And to me, this theory is also possible. I think it's possible that an individual stumbled across the party that was happening at Hogsback. It's possible that this person came across the event on Facebook and decided to head out in that direction. It's possible that they were just camping in the area. It's possible that they are somehow connected to the Highway of Tears. Maybe this person was one of the people who crashed the party and was one of the people that the group of friends did not know. Or this person could have just been watching the party from afar and saw that everyone was leaving except for Maddie. Again, Jordy said that Maddie was already in bed when she left around 1 a.m. and that there was still around 5 people there. I think 100% that Maddie thought that those 5 people were also going to be camping out. I don't think that she knew that they were going to pick up and leave. I don't think she would have necessarily been comfortable camping alone. I don't know Maddie personally, and I know she was very independent, so it's possible that she just didn't care. And she's like, I got this. I've camped out before. It's not a big deal to me. But I do believe that she thought that those other people were going to be camping out with her. If this person was watching from afar and saw that Maddie was now alone, I think they took that as their chance. If this is the case, this would be a total crime of opportunity. The one piece of evidence that I mentioned before that I think is extremely important and definitely supports this theory are the rings that were found outside of the tent on the ground. Supposedly, Maddie never took these rings off, so why were they off? I think that this person could have waited till Maddie was asleep, obviously, could have waited till everybody had left. I think they could have approached her tent and woken her up, and I think that they could have said, hey, I'm here to rob you. I just want your valuables. I'm not here to harm you. A lot of perpetrators do this. They do this to make themselves seem like less of a threat, and they do it to kind of analyze their victim to see how they're going to react. I think this person could have said, you know, I'm robbing you, I need your valuables, what do you have? Maddie, being maybe a little bit intoxicated, could have automatically thought about the rings that she was wearing and her earrings. I think that she could have taken them off willingly. It's very difficult to get jewelry off of someone unwillingly because usually, unless it's a very, very loose ring, it's going to get caught on your knuckles. It's not easy to rip it off of someone's hand, and I don't think a perpetrator would spend time taking all of them off unless the motive was robbery. So I think that maybe Maddie kind of threw them out towards the perpetrator, and while she was doing this, the perpetrator was probably sizing her up to see how she would react, really. I think it's also possible that as Maddie was taking off her jewelry, she may have come to and realized what was happening. And I think it's possible that Maddie could have challenged this person. Again, she was very independent, she was strong, she was athletic. It would not surprise me if she kind of challenged them. If you look at all of the items that were kind of pushed aside in Maddie's tent, I think it could point to two things. It could be either the perpetrator still, you know, saying they were looking for valuables and kind of ransacking her tent, or to me, it could indicate signs of a struggle. I think the person could have gotten control over the situation very quickly, probably with a weapon, and I think that they could have taken Maddie out of the area by vehicle. Her keys and phone being missing, I think, were just by chance. I know that Maddie doesn't go anywhere without her phone. It could have been in a pocket, a back pocket. Her keys, the same thing. You know, if I go to a party, I'm just thinking how I would do things. If I were going to a party and I brought my belongings, I would leave them in the car and then just take my keys with me, so that way I didn't have to worry about my belongings all night. And I think that's probably what Maddie did. She brought her purse and her backpack and left them in the truck, locked the truck, made sure that they were safe in there, and just had her keys. It's a lot easier to do that if you're partying. You don't want to be like carting around a huge purse and a backpack and all your stuff. You'd want to have as little on you as possible. I think the perpetrator left all of the jewelry there because robbery was never their motive, and I think that they definitely didn't want to take anything from the crime scene because they didn't want it to be linked back to them. To me, this theory explains why Maddie was never found out at Hogsback Lake, and also explains why the police are so adamant about the 50 people being at the party not being involved in Maddie's disappearance, and also them consistently saying that they believe she left the area by vehicle. I again think that they have some evidence that points them in that direction and that they just have not released it to the public. I am assuming that it has to do with her cell phone and pings. A lot of people automatically dismiss the Highway of Tears connection because Hogsback was about 71 miles away. However, I kind of disagree here. Predators will often branch out from their usual spots. If it was someone unknown to Maddie, I'm not saying they were a serial killer that was active and working on the Highway of Tears. It could have absolutely been someone who just happened to be at Hogsback and watched the events of that night unfold. This case is so haunting, and it's such a frustrating case because there's no reason that Maddie should not be here today. I know that everyone makes poor decisions, but to leave a friend alone like that, out in the middle of nowhere, just does not make any sense to me. Even if that person is, being stubborn and saying no, like, I'm not leaving, I just feel like there had to have been a way to make sure that she was still safe. Some people left the party at 4 a.m. Why didn't they just wait a couple more hours until morning, when it was light out? Why leave her there? It just seems so bizarre to me, and it's just absolutely heartbreaking. Maddie's disappearance has left the community completely heartbroken. Like I mentioned before, Vanderhoof is covered in Maddie's missing persons flyers. They're all over cars. There are billboards. They're literally so devastated by this because everybody loved Maddie. She was so well loved in the community, and her going missing has really left a huge hole in their community. The Scotts continue to try and raise awareness on Maddie's case, and the RCMP has constantly appealed to the public for more information regarding Maddie's disappearance, but the information just isn't coming in. Maddie was so well loved in this community. She was bright, she was energetic, she was fun, she just had such a spark to her, and she was just beginning her adult life. She was just going into adulthood. These should have been the best years of her life. Her whole future was ahead of her, and it was robbed from her, and now nobody knows where Maddie is. They have searched that area high and low. They've searched every little bit of that area as much as they possibly can, of course, but they have done so much searching and they haven't found anything, and it's honestly time for answers. Somebody knows something. I always say that. And in this case, I think it's possible that a lot of people know something. When she went missing, Maddie was 20 years old, had auburn hair and green eyes. She was 5'4" and weighed around 160 pounds. She has a silhouette of a bird tattooed on the inside of her left wrist, a nose piercing, and several ear piercings. If you have any information about her disappearance, please contact the Vanderhoof RCMP at 250-567-2222, or you can call into Crime Stoppers and remain completely anonymous at 1-800-222-TIPS. Again, it's completely anonymous. Her family is offering a $100,000 reward for any information that leads to Maddie. So this case is absolutely heartbreaking to me. I think that a lot of theories are possible in this case, which is why I wanted to kind of present all of them. There's a lot of theories out there that are a little bit different. These are the ones that are discussed the most often, so I'm interested to hear what you think happened. Do you think that Maddie had an accident of some kind? Do you think that foul play was involved? Do you think that people that were at the party that night are holding back information? Do you think that her disappearance is connected to the Highway of Tears? Let me know down in the comments below. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up for me, and don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button so you can watch all of my videos right when they are uploaded. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I hope to see you guys on my next one. Bye. you.